Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm your host, Alec McDonald. Taiwan has announced it is planning to build a new air defense system known as the T-Dome, while it also looks at increasing military spending amid rising tensions from China. Today, we are joined by Andrew Ye, Executive Director of the China Strategic Risk Institute. He's here to help us unpack China's growing use of gray zone tactics. From daily ADIZ incursions to the use of drone warfare, and what this all means for Taiwan and Europe's security response. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
What are the gray zone threats that both Europe and Taiwan are facing right now?
Yeah, well, I think we can think about the gray zone as everything from the light gray through to the dark gray. And what I mean by that is from kind of important but relatively, I guess, low-level threat activities through to activities which are really pushing up into the military domain. So I think with both Taiwan and Europe, we have the full range. So in Taiwan, we have everything from significant amounts of not just Chinese propaganda, but also information manipulation and disinformation campaigns within Taiwan, exploiting Taiwan's free information environment. And we see the same in Europe in terms of Russian and Chinese information operations. In Taiwan, we go all the way through to military incursions, as I'm sure is well known to your listeners, including near daily incursions past the median line. And we have begun to recently see that actually also take place in Europe in terms of Russia sending drones into Polish airspace, for example. That seems to be a direct mirroring of some of China's tactics around Taiwan in terms of those air zone incursions. So we see the full range.
5 years ago, the ADIZ incursions were really something unique every day. And now, if they are above a certain number, they will be reported. Otherwise, it's just a daily occurrence. So how did it get to be where Beijing is pushing this line where something that was significant a few years ago is now just normalized? Is that dangerous?
Yeah, it's extremely dangerous, and I think this is actually one of the misconceptions around grey zone warfare. There are elements of grey zone warfare which are purely symbolic, but if you're able to consistently and repeatedly normalize and change facts on the ground, then that does have a real practical impact. So I think the example you give is a really good one. Previously, the median line was considered a kind of de facto element of the status quo. And now that status quo has been changed, and the median line can be near daily ignored by Chinese forces, and that does matter, both in terms of Taiwan's defensive readiness, Taiwan's defensive resources, and in terms of China's normalization of what it sees as its own territory.
So I want to start off big level here. Taiwan and Europe both facing these gray zone threats. What sort of policies could we see either collaboratively or individually to combat these gray zone threats and start to push back against the normalization?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our side as a think tank, one of the areas we've been looking at is really exploring what does it mean for different European governments to play a role in terms of highlighting and pushing back against some of China's gray zone threats against Taiwan. We do believe this is in Europe's interests because ultimately Europe, like Taiwan, gains if there is peace and stability in the region. So we do think it is important that European countries are having a tangible and meaningful response to even grey zone escalations, not just waiting for a kind of blockade or military contingency, but actually, for example, every time China escalates the grey zone, there needs to be a diplomatic response, both in terms of statements, but also in terms of raising it directly with the Chinese. There needs to be an economic response in terms of sanctioning the Chinese military actors involved. It doesn't need to be kind of full-scale, widespread sanctions of the kind that we've seen on Russia yet, but still some level of sanctions to show that it's more than just words. And then working with Taiwan as well to bolster Taiwan's own resilience. I think that's a very effective way.
Pivoting a bit to specific defense subjects, the T-Dome. This is something that President Lai announced during his Double 10-Day speech. How important is a new and upgraded aerial defense system for Taiwan?
Yeah, I think it's vitally important. It has a strong deterrent effect. Beyond that, I think it's also about making Taiwanese feel safe, confident in their security, and that also has an economic impact as well in terms of businesses being willing to invest in Taiwan and so on. So I do think it's vitally important. I really hope it can happen quickly, and that Taiwan can obviously get this going, but also that other countries are willing to play their part in terms of helping Taiwan get the equipment and the technological know-how needed to do this.
One of the biggest risks of gray zone warfare is the fact that it can turn quite quickly from an innocuous activity to an outright attack. So how important could an early detection system be to the T-dome?
The challenge of grey zone activities is it normalizes incursions and activities very close to Taiwan, and so the readiness and the ability to respond, that decision time has really shrunk down into matters of minutes. So yeah, I think technology which can enhance detection, not just in the aerial domain, but also the maritime domain, I think is crucially important. And not just being able to collect the data, but also being able to have the powerful data analysis tools to be able to distinguish from the masses of data that are being brought in, what is the genuinely suspicious behavior versus what is the normal, ordinary, routine and legitimate behavior, again, whether that's the aerial or the maritime domain.
Do you think that there might be challenges with regards to the T-dome, as we have seen some recent delays between arms sales between the United States and Taiwan?
Yeah, I mean, it is concerning seeing the delays in the arms sales. We would all much rather they came here much quicker. I think hopefully the US can see that actually something like the T-dome and other efforts to strengthen Taiwan's deterrence capacity, these are ultimately, I think, cost-saving measures for the US, because the worst-case scenario for the US is being dragged into a costly and expensive war with China over Taiwan. And the more Taiwan can strengthen its own deterrence to stop that contingency developing in the first place, the more that's in the US interest as well. And I do think Taiwan, from the US perspective, is a highly cost-effective way in terms of securing peace, stability, and the regional balance of power in the Indo-Pacific.
Something that might go undetected, or that experts are feared might go undetected, is drones. Both Europe and Taiwan are facing the potential of drone threats right now. Europe a little bit, especially in Ukraine. We're seeing that live on the battlefield. How do we detect against early drone attacks?
I think it's a huge challenge because it spans, again, that full extent of the grey zone, because we're not just talking about kind of military drones and their ability to conduct attacks on territory, as we saw with the drones around Copenhagen and Oslo airports just some weeks ago. We're also talking about relatively ordinary drones, maybe civilian commercial drones, but they're still able to have an outsized impact simply by disrupting airports and other critical infrastructure. So I think it needs to be thought of as a threat both to civilian and military infrastructure. And there needs to be varying levels of protection. I mean, certainly around critical infrastructure, hard protection in terms of detection, in terms of drone detection and anti-drone weaponry. But also, one of the interesting cases, I think, in the Oslo and Copenhagen airport cases, is that the best theory at the moment is that those drones were released from Russian-linked vessels close to the shore. So again, we're coming back to this maritime domain awareness issue. Again, we're coming back to this shadow or dark fleet issue. And that's another area where I think Europe and Taiwan can really work together, is by building that maritime domain awareness and sharing information with each other.
One of the other things that we saw earlier this year was what seemed to be a Ukrainian intelligence attack on a Russian airbase. They took an innocuous-looking truck deep into Russian territory and then released a swarm of drones that was able to strike Russian aircraft, bombers, fighters that were just sitting idle. So how do we defend against drone strikes when they move so quickly and can move from an idle truck that's just outside of an airbase?
Yeah, it's a massive challenge. It's a massive threat, and I think Taiwan has come some of the way with this. We know that not all of Taiwan's assets are kind of out in the open, as it were, and that certainly helps in terms of the protection of air bases. But yes, definitely with critical military sites like air bases, it's a huge challenge. But as I said earlier, I think linking it back to civilian infrastructure is important as well, because in a grey zone scenario, we might not be looking at direct attacks on military infrastructure. We might be much more likely to see sabotage of power grids, water supplies, those civilian infrastructure services which are still critical.
You talked a little bit earlier about the Copenhagen airport incident. Could you introduce a little bit more about what happened there, and then what conversations has that kick-started in Europe?
I mean, a small number of drones were detected in the vicinity of Copenhagen and Oslo airports. They hung around for a few hours before they were able to be taken down. But even just those few hours causes massive disruptions across flight networks over Europe. We're talking about thousands of passengers impacted, millions of euros in terms of compensation costs for the airline, and so on. So the economic and civilian impact is large. And so in terms of the conversations they've kickstarted, it is, how do you protect civilian infrastructure from disruption by drones? There's also a question of to what extent are European countries able to coordinate and respond when suspected vessels or other equipment are being used in these attacks. So it's also an accountability and enforcement question as well.
In 2020, we saw Beijing use the national security law in Hong Kong. And since then, many Hong Kongers have fled to Australia, Taiwan, the United Kingdom, and become refugees. Specifically in the UK, many, however, have been harassed with kind of what would also fall into this gray zone threat of its extrajudicial harassment. What conversations has that started in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, it's the term transnational repression has been used to try and describe some of these activities. So that's China's ability to repress dissidents, activists, the diaspora beyond China's borders. It started a huge conversation in the UK because we've been very fortunate to welcome large numbers of Hong Kongers into the UK over the last few years. I think we're talking 160,000, something like that. So large numbers. The threat is large. I mean, it's a threat to the individual in terms of personal safety. It's a threat to our civic life because these individuals might consider self-censorship to avoid this repression, or they might not be able to fully partake in political and public life because of this. And it's a threat to our information environment as well, because a lot of the way in which some of these activists are targeted is through deepfake technologies, other ways.
Do you think that there could be, because this is a similar kind of threat that could happen to Taiwan activists, it's a great way the way that you silence Taiwan on the international stage. Do you think that this is something that governments should take a closer look at in the incidents that Taiwan is attacked, that those living abroad, to prevent them from being harassed and to protect their status, whether they're civilians or whether they're citizens or refugees?
Absolutely. I mean, we know that the Chinese Communist Party considers Taiwan nationals Chinese nationals. They have no qualms whatsoever in enforcing their measures against them. We've seen China beef up the sentences on the anti-secession law, for example. So I think that there's a clear statement of intent or statement of threat from the Chinese side that this is actions that they would consider. We haven't seen quite the same scale in terms of targeting yet on Taiwanese as we have for Hong Kongers or Uyghurs or Chinese dissidents. But it is absolutely something that governments should be aware of. Preparing ways in which Taiwanese communities abroad can be listened to, can be protected in these incidents, has to be part of that discussion as well.
Do you think that we are getting ahead of Beijing with regard to these gray zone threats, or is there a lot of urgent work that we need to do?
I mean, I think we're definitely moving in the right direction, at least here in Taiwan. I've been encouraged at how quickly Taiwan has been able to respond to some of these issues. So take, for example, undersea cables. The speed at which Taiwan has been able to propose 7 new laws and already take action to prosecute a previous case of undersea cable damage. Europe has not managed any of that. I mean, the EU has its flagship action plan on undersea cable security. That's still at the risk assessment stage. It hasn't been implemented yet. And in the last month, a similar case to the one we saw in Taiwan collapsed in Finland because the local court decided it didn't have jurisdiction over the issue. So I think in Taiwan, the sense of urgency is there, the willpower is there.
Andrew, thank you very much for being on today. It was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Zoom in, Zoom out. For more stories from Taiwan, plus make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.